The moment you stop bleeding for people who never plan to heal, they call it betrayal. Welcome in, my dear chosen ones. Funny how loud it got the second you went quiet. Funny how the same people who lived comfortably off your exhaustion are suddenly acting wounded now that the supply has been cut. They're stunned, off balance, scrambling. Not because you attacked them, but because you finally stepped out of reach. Let's get one thing straight right now. You weren't trying to save anyone. You were trying to survive. And that's exactly why this hit them so hard. See, chosen ones, people who benefit from your self-sacrifice, panic when you stop offering it. Your role was never optional to them. You were the shock absorber, the emotional sponge, the one who absorbed impact so they never had to feel it. And when you removed yourself, the crash finally reached them. They're calling you selfish, cold, changed, distant. Let me translate that for you in plain language. They lost access. That's it. That's the crime. You stopped being available for extraction. You might be asking yourself right now, why are they acting like I did something to them when all I did was step back? Because to people who were living off your energy, your boundaries feel like violence. When you stop overfunctioning, their underfunctioning gets exposed. When you stop fixing, their mess becomes visible, and visibility is their biggest fear. Here's a metaphor they hate. You were the load-bearing wall. Nobody compliments the wall. Nobody thanks it. Everyone just leans on it until it cracks. And when you finally step away and the structure starts shaking, they don't ask why the building was flawed. They blame the wall for moving. Chosen ones, that's the power you don't even realize you hold. You weren't loud, you weren't dramatic, you didn't declare war. You simply stopped holding what was never yours to carry. And that quiet decision shook an entire ecosystem built on your silence. They thought you were predictable, dependable, permanent, like gravity. They assumed you'd always be there, cleaning up emotional spills, absorbing blame, smoothing tension, explaining yourself, apologizing for having limits. They mistook your endurance for obligation, and now they're watching the ground shift under their feet. Let me answer the questions forming in your mind right now, because I know they're there. Why does it feel like everything changed the moment I walked away? Because it did. Systems built on your compliance cannot survive your clarity. When you step out of alignment with dysfunction, the imbalance shows instantly. Why do they suddenly care now? They don't care, they noticed. There's a difference. You don't miss water until the well runs dry. Why does my silence bother them more than anything I ever said? Because silence means you're no longer negotiating your worth. Silence means you've already decided. Here's the part they'll never admit out loud. They needed you tired. They needed you doubting yourself. They needed you busy fixing, explaining, and carrying so you'd never look up long enough to leave. Your exhaustion made their comfort possible, and the moment you stopped trying to rescue people who were committed to staying the same, something terrifying happened for them. They were left alone with themselves. Chosen ones, you didn't plan to become a symbol. You didn't announce a transformation. You didn't ask anyone to follow. You just stopped shrinking. And somehow that was enough to flip the entire script. Think about it. A single person refusing to play their assigned role can destabilize a whole group. One person stepping out of the pattern forces everyone else to confront the pattern. That's why they're angry. That's why they're rewriting the story. That's why they're whispering your name like it's a warning. Because you didn't just leave, you proved leaving was possible. You were never trying to be powerful. You just got tired of bleeding quietly. You weren't chasing growth. You were escaping decay. And the moment you chose yourself, without speeches, without permission, without apology, the ripples started. Others saw it. even if they didn't say a word, even if they acted indifferent. Someone out there clocked your move and felt something unlock inside them. Your exit became evidence. Your calm became contagious. Your refusal to explain became a blueprint. That's the burden and the privilege of being chosen. Not chosen by fate or chance, chosen because you're the one who sees the truth first. You feel the misalignment sooner. You break earlier. You walk away while others are still convincing themselves it's fine. And that scares people who depend on denial to survive. My dear chosen ones, before we step into the next part, I need you to lock in with me. If this message hit you, don't just feel it, support it. Tap the like button so this video reaches the ones who are still trapped in guilt, still shrinking, still carrying what was never theirs. And subscribe to the channel, because this isn't random content, this is energy with a purpose. Your support keeps us pushing harder, creating deeper, more inspiring, life-changing messages that wake people up and shift their mindset for real. Like, subscribe, and stay close. This story isn't finished yet. So no, you didn't try to save anyone. You just stopped setting yourself on fire to keep everyone else warm. And it turns out, that decision didn't just save you. It exposed everything. Stay with me, chosen ones. This isn't the end of the story. This is the moment the aftershock begins. Before we go any further, pause with me for a second, chosen one. If these words are landing heavy, if this feels uncomfortably familiar, that's not coincidence, that's alignment. Support this message by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel so we can keep delivering content that challenges, energizes, and wakes people up. Drop 77 in the comments if you know you weren't trying to save anyone, but somehow everything shifted when you chose yourself. If you want to go deeper, show support through super thanks. Now, steady yourself, because from here on, we break this down step by step. And if you're truly one of the chosen, you'll recognize every sign we're about to uncover. Let's begin. Number 1. The exact moment you stopped being their safety net and everything shifted. When you stepped back, the floor gave way. People don't panic when you leave because they miss you. They panic because the weight they placed on you finally falls back on them. My dear chosen ones, this was the moment everything shifted, even if nobody said it out loud. The exact second you stopped being their safety net, their backup plan, their emotional insurance policy. You didn't announce it. You didn't threaten. You didn't make a scene. You simply stopped absorbing what was never yours to carry. And that quiet move hit harder than any confrontation ever could. Let's talk about why this moment matters so much. For a long time, you were the buffer, the shock absorber, the one who caught everything before it hit the ground. When things went wrong, you stepped in. When emotions got messy, you cleaned them up. When responsibility showed up, you carried it. Not because you were asked, but because you were capable. And that capability turned into expectation. Expectation turned into dependence. And dependence turned into entitlement. Chosen ones, you weren't seen as support. You were treated like infrastructure, like electricity, only noticed when it goes out. So when you stepped back, even slightly, the system started failing. Not because you broke it, but because it was never built to stand on its own. This is why the reaction felt so intense. You might be asking yourself, why did things fall apart so fast when I stopped helping? Because you were holding more than your share. You were carrying weight that didn't belong to you. You were propping up people who never learned how to stand. And when you moved, gravity did what gravity always does. It pulled everything down. Here's a metaphor they hate. Imagine a building with a cracked foundation. Instead of fixing it, everyone leans on one strong pillar and calls the problem solved. That pillar was you. No one thanks the pillar. No one asks if it's cracking. They just keep stacking more weight on it. And when the pillar finally shifts to protect itself, the building trembles. Suddenly they're angry at the pillar, not the faulty structure. Chosen ones, this is the power of being chosen. Not special in an ego sense, chosen because you're the one who sees reality clearly, chosen because you feel imbalance before others admit it exists, chosen because you reach breaking points faster, not because you're weak, but because you've been holding too much for too long. The moment you stopped being the safety net, panic showed up. Not concern, panic. Because without you, excuses stopped working. Without you, responsibility had nowhere to hide. Without you, people had to face the consequences of their own patterns. And that's terrifying for anyone who relied on you to soften every fall. You may be wondering, why did they act offended instead of grateful? Because gratitude requires awareness, and awareness would mean admitting how much they depended on you without giving back. It's easier to call you selfish than to admit you were essential. It's easier to say you changed than to admit they stayed the same. Let's be clear, chosen ones, you didn't abandon anyone. You stopped being a crutch. You didn't withdraw love. You withdrew labor disguised as love. You didn't become cold. You became unavailable for exploitation. And that distinction matters, even if they refuse to see it. Here's the part that hits them hardest. You didn't replace yourself. You didn't assign someone new to your role. You didn't train anyone to take over. You simply left the space empty. And that emptiness spoke louder than any explanation, because it exposed a truth they didn't want to face. The system only worked because you were overgiving. Think about it. If your absence caused chaos, what does that say about what you were carrying? If things collapsed when you stepped back, doesn't that prove you were never just helping? You were stabilizing entire dynamics. You were absorbing consequences so others could avoid growth. And the moment you stopped, the imbalance became visible. Chosen ones, this is where your power actually lives. Not in control, not in fixing, not in saving, but in knowing when to step back and let reality do its job. People don't grow when you catch them every time they fall. Systems don't heal when one person keeps compensating for everyone else. You might still feel guilt creeping in, that voice that says, maybe I should have stayed. Maybe I should have helped a little longer. That voice isn't wisdom, it's conditioning. It's the echo of a role you were trained to play. But here's the truth. Staying would have delayed the collapse, not prevented it. And the longer you stayed, the more of yourself you would have lost. The shift happened the moment you chose self-respect over reliability. The moment you realized that being dependable doesn't mean being disposable. The moment you stopped confusing loyalty with self-erasure. That's when everything changed, not just around you, but inside you. Chosen ones, the enemy in this story isn't a person. It's the pattern. The pattern that says one person should carry the weight so everyone else can stay comfortable. The pattern that rewards overgiving and punishes boundaries. The pattern that labels self-preservation as betrayal. And the moment you stepped out of that pattern, the illusion cracked. That's why they felt it. That's why the atmosphere shifted. That's why your absence felt heavier than your presence ever did. Because you were never extra, you were essential. And now that you're no longer available as a safety net, reality is doing what it was always supposed to do. So stand firm, chosen ones. That moment you stepped back wasn't a mistake. It was the first honest move you made in a long time. And from here on, we're going to break down exactly how that single decision didn't just change your life. It quietly saved everything that depended on you collapsing. Number 2, why your breakdown was convenient for them and your recovery was not. They were comfortable with you falling apart until you started standing back up. Your pain was acceptable to them because it kept you useful. Your healing became a problem the moment it made you unreachable. My dear chosen ones, this is the part most people never want to admit, because it's ugly, uncomfortable, and impossible to unsee once it clicks. Your breakdown didn't scare them. It didn't alarm them. In many ways, it worked perfectly for them. You struggling meant you stayed in place. You doubting yourself meant you kept reaching outward instead of inward. You being overwhelmed meant you were easier to direct, easier to lean on, easier to keep busy fixing things that weren't yours. Your exhaustion fit neatly into their world. Think about it. When you were breaking down, when you were tired, anxious, stretched thin, questioning yourself, they knew where you were. You were predictable. You were still showing up, still apologizing, still over-explaining, still trying to earn peace instead of claiming it. Your breakdown didn't disrupt their comfort, it reinforced it. You were still accessible, still useful, still available to absorb pressure so they didn't have to. Chosen ones, that's why nobody rushed to stop you from burning out. That's why your pain was minimized, normalized, brushed aside. You're strong. You'll be fine. You always handle it. Those weren't compliments. They were permission slips for them to keep taking without guilt. As long as you were breaking quietly, the system kept working. But the moment you started recovering, everything changed. Your recovery wasn't loud. It wasn't performative. You didn't announce it with speeches or explanations. It showed up in small, dangerous ways. You stopped responding immediately. You stopped volunteering. You stopped overgiving. You started pausing before saying yes. You started choosing rest over obligation. And that's when the tension started. Because healing doesn't just restore you, it disrupts dynamics. You might be wondering, why did they seem supportive when I was struggling, but distant or irritated when I got better? Because your breakdown didn't threaten their access. Your recovery did. A healed version of you doesn't overextend. A healed version of you doesn't chase validation. A healed version of you doesn't tolerate imbalance just to keep the peace. And that version is inconvenient for people who benefited from your self-neglect. Here's the metaphor they don't like. You were a door that never closed. Anyone could walk in, drop their weight, take what they needed, and leave. Your breakdown meant the door was still open, just creaking. Your recovery meant the door started closing, and suddenly people who never knocked started complaining about boundaries. Chosen ones, this is where the guilt tries to creep in. That voice that says, why does it feel like I'm losing people now that I'm healthier? Because some connections were built on your lack of boundaries, not mutual respect. They weren't attached to you, they were attached to what you provided when you were depleted. Your recovery exposed the transaction. Let's be honest, when you were struggling, they didn't feel challenged. They didn't feel compared to. They didn't feel exposed. Your pain made them feel stable by contrast. Your chaos made their stagnation feel acceptable. But healing has a way of holding up a mirror. And mirrors make people uncomfortable when they've been avoiding themselves. So they resisted it. Subtly at first. Dismissive comments, jokes, distance, then labels. You've changed. You're different. You're not the same anymore. You're right. You're not. You're no longer operating from survival mode, and survival mode was very convenient for them. Chosen ones understand this clearly. Your recovery didn't harm anyone. It removed the cushioning that protected them from consequences. You stopped absorbing what they refused to handle. You stopped being the emotional shock absorber. And when the pressure bounced back to where it belonged, they blamed you for the discomfort. You didn't become selfish. You became aware. You didn't become cold. You became regulated. You didn't become distant. You became selective. And that selectiveness is what they couldn't manipulate. Here's the truth they'll never say out loud. They preferred you broken because broken people are easier to control, easier to guilt, easier to keep busy proving their worth. Healing people ask questions. Healing people say no. Healing people don't negotiate their basic needs. And once you started healing, you stopped being an easy environment to exploit. You may still catch yourself wondering, should I slow down my healing so things don't feel so tense? No, chosen one. That tension is information. It's telling you exactly who benefited from your pain and who can handle your growth. Healing doesn't ruin healthy connections, it exposes unhealthy ones. Your recovery wasn't inconvenient because it was wrong. It was inconvenient because it removed leverage. So if you feel pushback, distance, or resistance now that you're standing stronger, understand this. You're not losing ground. You're shedding weight. You're not becoming less caring. You're becoming less available for dynamics that required you to suffer in order to belong. You weren't trying to save anyone. You were trying to heal, and in doing that, you stopped enabling systems that depended on you staying broken. That's why your recovery feels disruptive. That's why it feels powerful, and that's why, without even intending to, you saved everything that needed to collapse so something healthier could exist. Stay with me, chosen ones. This is only the second layer. Number 3. The quiet exit that changed the temperature of every room you left. The loudest move you ever made was leaving without asking anyone to understand. Chosen ones, this is where it really happened. Not when you argued, not when you explained, not when you tried one last time to fix things. It happened when you went quiet, when you stopped announcing your pain, when you stopped negotiating your worth, when you exited without slamming doors or lighting fires. That silence didn't mean weakness, it meant finality. And it changed the temperature of every room you walked out of. You didn't storm out, you didn't give speeches, you didn't gather witnesses, you simply removed your energy. And that was devastating, because people were never prepared for the version of you that would leave clean. They were prepared for you to stay and suffer. They were prepared for you to complain and still show up. They were prepared for noise. They were not prepared for absence. Chosen ones, your quiet exit hit harder than confrontation ever could, because confrontation keeps you involved. Silence ends the contract. Silence says, I'm no longer available for this dynamic. And that message echoes longer than any argument. When you stopped reacting, stopped defending, stopped explaining, the entire atmosphere shifted. Conversations felt heavier, rooms felt colder, laughter felt forced, because the person who used to regulate the emotional temperature wasn't there anymore. You might be wondering, why did my silence bother them so much? Because silence removes leverage. When you speak, they can twist your words. When you explain, they can misunderstand on purpose. When you react, they can blame you for the chaos. But when you go quiet, all that's left is the truth sitting in the room with them. And most people can't handle that. Think about it like this. You were the thermostat. You adjusted yourself so others could stay comfortable. You absorbed tension. You softened conflict. You filled awkward silences. You made things work, even when they shouldn't have. So when you left quietly, the system lost its regulator. Suddenly, emotions ran wild. Problems surfaced. Tension spiked, and everyone felt it, even if they didn't know how to name it. Chosen ones, this is why your exit felt like a shockwave. Not because you were loud, but because you were foundational. You didn't realize how much you were stabilizing until you stopped, and neither did they. That's why they replay conversations now. That's why your name makes rooms go quiet. That's why they check on you without reaching out. They're trying to locate the moment everything changed. Here's the part that hits hardest. You didn't leave to punish anyone. You left to breathe. You weren't trying to teach a lesson. You were trying to survive. But the quiet way you left forced everyone to confront something uncomfortable. Things only worked because you were sacrificing yourself. You didn't announce boundaries. You embodied them. You didn't demand respect. You removed access. And removal is terrifying to people who assumed you'd always be there. Your silence wasn't passive, it was decisive. It said, "I've already chosen myself, and I'm not reopening the discussion." Chosen ones, this is why they felt exposed. When you leave loudly, people can call you dramatic. When you leave quietly, they have to ask themselves why you were done. And that question burns. Because deep down, they know. They remember the warnings they ignored, the moments you tried to communicate, the times you swallowed discomfort to keep peace. Your silence now forces those memories to resurface. You might ask, why does it feel like I still have power even though I walked away? Because power doesn't come from control, it comes from detachment. The moment you stopped needing validation, approval, or closure from people who drained you, you reclaimed your position. You didn't chase understanding, you didn't seek permission, you let your absence speak. And absence is undeniable. Imagine a room where one person always brings warmth, not by trying, but by being present. When that person leaves, the cold is immediate. That's what happened when you exited quietly. People didn't miss your words. They missed the way things functioned around you. They missed the stability, the balance, the emotional labor you provided without recognition. Chosen ones, this is why your quiet exit saved everything. It stopped the slow leak. It ended the silent self-erasure. It forced reality to rebalance. You didn't destroy anything. You exposed what couldn't stand without you. And exposure is the beginning of correction. You didn't need to announce your strength. You demonstrated it by leaving without chaos, by not chasing closure, by not begging to be understood. That restraint is rare. That discipline is power. And people felt it immediately, even if they never admitted it. So if you're sitting there wondering whether your quiet exit mattered, let this settle in. Rooms don't change temperature because of noise. They change when the source of balance leaves. And you were that source. You always were. That's why everything felt different the moment you walked out. And that's why nothing could ever go back to the way it was. Number 4. How selfish became the label they used when control slipped away. When selfish became their favorite word the moment control slipped. People only call you selfish when they can no longer use you without resistance. My dear chosen ones, this is where the narrative got twisted on purpose. Not by accident, not out of confusion, but out of fear. The moment you stopped bending, the moment you stopped over-explaining, the moment you stopped prioritizing their comfort over your sanity, a word suddenly appeared on their lips like a weapon they'd been waiting to use. Selfish. Let's be clear from the start. They didn't call you selfish when you were exhausted. They didn't call you selfish when you were giving endlessly. They didn't call you selfish when you were fixing their messes, absorbing their stress, or carrying responsibilities they avoided. Back then, you were strong, reliable, the only one who understands. The label changed only when control slipped away. Chosen ones, selfish is not a description, it's a reaction. It's what people say when they lose access to you and don't know how to cope without the benefits you provided. It's a word designed to trigger guilt, because guilt was always the leash they used to keep you close. Ask yourself this question honestly. When did they start using that word? Was it when you asked for rest? When you said no without apologizing? When you stopped explaining your boundaries like you were on trial? When you chose not to show up for chaos that never showed up for you? Exactly. Selfish only entered the conversation when obedience exited it. Here's the metaphor they don't want you to see. Imagine a remote control that suddenly stops working. The owner doesn't say, "Maybe I relied on this too much." They say, "It's broken." That's what happened to you. You stopped responding to the same buttons, guilt, urgency, obligation, and instead of adjusting their behavior, they blamed you for no longer responding. Chosen ones, control thrives on predictability. They knew how to pull you back. They knew which strings to tug. They knew you'd fold if they framed it as loyalty, responsibility, or love. And the moment those tactics stopped working, panic kicked in. Not sadness, not reflection, panic. Because panic is what happens when a system built on manipulation realizes it no longer functions. You might be thinking, if I really was selfish, why does it feel like I'm finally breathing? That's your answer. Selfishness drains others for personal gain. What you did was the opposite. You stopped draining yourself to maintain balance for everyone else. You stopped being the unpaid regulator of other people's emotions. Here's the part that hits hardest for them. You didn't replace them. You didn't beg them to understand. You didn't argue your case. You just moved differently. And nothing terrifies controlling dynamics more than someone who no longer needs approval to act. Chosen ones notice how the accusation never comes with specifics. They don't say what you did that was wrong. They say how your choice made them feel. Because control is emotional, not logical, they felt exposed. They felt inconvenienced. They felt the loss of influence. And instead of owning that, they projected it onto you. Let's dismantle the lie completely. You weren't selfish for choosing rest over resentment. You weren't selfish for choosing boundaries over burnout. You weren't selfish for choosing clarity over chaos. You weren't selfish for choosing yourself after years of choosing everyone else. What changed wasn't your character. What changed was your availability for exploitation. Chosen ones, this is the power of being chosen. You're the one who breaks patterns without permission. You're the one who disrupts unhealthy balance just by stepping back. You're the one who forces truth to surface without saying a word. And truth is uncomfortable for anyone who benefited from the lie. They needed the selfish label because it protects them from accountability. If you're selfish, they don't have to ask why you were exhausted. If you're selfish, they don't have to admit how much they took. If you're selfish, they don't have to face the imbalance. The label keeps the spotlight off them. But here's what they can't undo. The moment you accepted being misunderstood rather than overextended, you won. The moment you chose peace over performance, you reclaimed control. The moment you stopped defending yourself, their accusations lost power. Chosen ones, selfish is what they call you when you stop playing small enough for them to feel big. It's what they say when your independence exposes their dependence. It's what comes out when control slips and truth rushes in to fill the gap. So wear the label if you have to. Let them say it. Because what they call selfish is actually self-respect. What they call cold is actually calm. What they call distance is actually discernment. And what they call betrayal is actually you stepping out of a role that was slowly erasing you. You weren't trying to save anyone, you were trying to stop disappearing. And in doing that, you didn't just protect yourself. You dismantled a system that relied on your silence. That's why the word selfish showed up. Not because you were wrong, but because control finally slipped away. Number 5. The role you never agreed to play, holding everything together until you walked out. The part you were cast in without consent until you finally left the stage. They never asked if you wanted the role. They just handed you the weight and called it love. My dear chosen ones, this is the chapter that explains the exhaustion you could never fully put into words, the role you never auditioned for, the responsibility you never agreed to carry. Yet somehow you were the one holding everything together while everyone else played their part comfortably. You didn't step into that position because you wanted control. You stepped into it because no one else would. And over time, what started as helping quietly turned into being expected endlessly. You became the organizer, the fixer, the stabilizer, the one people leaned on when things fell apart. Not because you were the strongest by choice, but because you were the most reliable by nature. And reliability, in the wrong environment, doesn't get respected. It gets exploited, slowly, casually. until it feels normal for everyone except you. Chosen ones, this is why you always felt tired in rooms that claimed to care about you. You weren't just participating, you were managing. You weren't just present. You were holding the emotional structure upright, like a beam inside a building, invisible but essential, never praised until it cracks. Here's the metaphor they never want to hear. You were the thread stitching everything together: conversations, relationships, routines, peace. And nobody thanks the thread. They just keep pulling on it. They assume it won't snap. And when it finally does, they don't ask why it was stretched so thin. They ask why you couldn't hold longer. You might be asking yourself right now, how did I end up carrying so much without realizing it? Because it didn't happen all at once. It happened in small moments. One favor, one sacrifice. One time you said yes when you should have rested. One time you stayed quiet to keep things smooth. And slowly, your presence became a requirement. Your effort became invisible. Your absence became unthinkable. Chosen ones, you weren't valued as a person. You were relied on as a function. You weren't loved for who you were. You were depended on for what you provided. Stability, consistency, emotional labor. You became the glue, and glue doesn't get celebrated. It just gets used. That's why when you finally walked out, it shocked everyone. Not because you were irreplaceable in their eyes, but because the system they built assumed you'd never leave. They didn't have a backup plan. They didn't have structure. They had you. And you leaving exposed how fragile everything actually was. Let's hit this truth head on. You didn't abandon anyone. You stopped playing a role that was draining the life out of you. You didn't quit. You opted out of being the only one trying, and that choice didn't destroy anything real. It revealed what was fake, unstable, and unsustainable. Chosen ones, this is where guilt tries to creep in. That familiar voice saying, if I hadn't left, things wouldn't have fallen apart. But listen carefully. If your presence was the only thing holding it together, then it was already broken. You were just delaying the collapse at your own expense. Here's the part that hurts them the most. You didn't fight for the role. You didn't argue your case. You didn't demand appreciation. You just stopped showing up the same way. And suddenly, everyone noticed how much you were doing. Your silence did what your effort never could. It made your value undeniable. Think about it. If you were too much, why did everything fall apart when you left? If you were overreacting, why did the structure crumble without you? If you were replaceable, why did the weight feel heavier the moment you were gone? These are questions they don't want to answer, because the answers point straight back to them. Chosen ones, walking out wasn't dramatic. It was decisive. It wasn't revenge. It was self-respect. You didn't slam doors. You simply stopped holding doors open for people who never planned to walk beside you. And here's the quiet power in that decision. By leaving, you didn't just free yourself. You forced accountability into the room. You handed responsibility back to the people who avoided it for years. You removed the cushion that softened every consequence. And yes, it hurt. For them. Because for the first time they had to carry what they dropped on you. You weren't trying to save anyone when you walked out. You were trying to stop losing yourself. But in doing that, something bigger happened. You exposed the imbalance. You broke the pattern. You ended a cycle that depended on your silence. Chosen ones, the role you never agreed to play, no longer owns you. The stage you walked off of no longer defines you. And the moment you chose yourself over holding everything together, you didn't ruin the story, you rewrote it. Because sometimes saving everything doesn't look like staying. Sometimes it looks like leaving and letting the truth stand on its own. Number 6. When giving became expected and loyalty turned into exploitation. When giving turned into obligation and loyalty was quietly used against you. The moment your kindness becomes expected, it stops being appreciated and starts being exploited. My dear chosen ones, this is the stage most people never see clearly while they're inside it. This is where generosity slowly stops being a choice and starts being treated like a duty. Where loyalty, something meant to be mutual, gets twisted into a one-sided contract you never signed. And the reason this hits you so hard now is because you were never stingy. You were too giving in rooms that learned how to take without shame. At first, it didn't look like exploitation. It never does. It looked like responsibility, like love, like being the bigger person. You stepped up because things needed to be handled. You stayed because walking away felt wrong. You gave more because you could. And somewhere along the way, what started as generosity became expectation. What started as loyalty became leverage. Chosen ones, here's the uncomfortable truth. The more consistent you were, the more invisible your effort became. People stopped seeing your giving as a gift and started seeing it as part of the environment, like air, necessary, unnoticed, and only missed when it's gone. They didn't wake up one day and decide to use you. They slowly adjusted their lives around your availability until your absence felt like a betrayal. This is why setting boundaries shocked them. Not because you were unreasonable, but because you disrupted a system that depended on your silence. You might have asked yourself, why did they get upset when I finally said no? Because no threatened the comfort they built on your yes. When you stopped giving automatically, they had to confront how much they were taking intentionally. Think about it like this. Imagine a well that never runs dry. People stop conserving water. They stop appreciating it. They stop thinking about sustainability. They just take. And when the well finally closes to refill, they don't ask if it's okay. They complain about the inconvenience. That was you, not a person in their eyes, an endless resource. Chosen ones, loyalty was weaponized against you. You were praised for being dependable, understanding, forgiving, strong. But those compliments came with an unspoken expectation. Don't change. Don't grow past us. Don't stop carrying us. Don't realize your worth. The moment you did, loyalty suddenly became a word they used to guilt you back into position. You may have wondered, why did my effort feel less valued the more I gave? Because overgiving teaches people that access to you has no cost. And when access is free, respect drops. They confused your patience with permission, your silence with agreement, your endurance with consent. Here's the part that cuts deep. They didn't love your loyalty. They loved what your loyalty allowed them to avoid. Responsibility, accountability, growth. You were loyal to people who never planned to meet you at the same level. And when you stopped compensating for their lack, the imbalance became undeniable. Chosen ones, this is why you felt drained instead of fulfilled. True loyalty doesn't empty you. It strengthens both sides. Exploitation always leaves one person exhausted and the other entitled. And deep down, you felt it. That quiet resentment. That heaviness after giving, that internal voice asking, why am I always the one? But you ignored it because you were taught that leaving makes you disloyal, that prioritizing yourself makes you selfish, that endurance equals virtue. And so you stayed longer than you should have, giving more than was sustainable, hoping things would balance out on their own. They didn't. They never do. The moment you pulled back, even slightly, the reaction exposed everything. They didn't ask how you were. They questioned your character. They didn't check if you were okay. They accused you of changing. Because when loyalty turns into entitlement, boundaries feel like betrayal. Let this land, chosen ones. You didn't fail anyone. You simply stopped participating in your own depletion. You didn't break trust. You broke a pattern. You didn't withdraw love. You withdrew access to labor disguised as love. And here's why this matters in the bigger picture. When you stopped giving endlessly, you didn't just protect yourself. You forced a reset. You allowed consequences to return to the people who created them. You removed the cushion that softened every fall. And yes, it felt harsh, but it was necessary. This is where the title comes alive. You weren't trying to save anyone. You were trying to stop disappearing. And in doing that, you saved your energy, your clarity, your future. You saved yourself from becoming a permanent utility in other people's lives. Chosen ones, loyalty without reciprocity is not virtue, it's self-erasure. And the moment you realized that, everything changed. Not because you became less giving, but because you finally gave yourself permission to matter. And that decision, quiet as it was, didn't just change the dynamic. It exposed it. Number 7. The day you chose survival over approval and didn't apologize for it. The day you picked yourself and let the noise burn. Approval is a leash. Survival is the moment you slip it off and walk away while they're still calling your name. Chosen ones, this was the day everything inside you snapped into clarity. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. The day you chose survival over approval and didn't apologize for it. The day you realized that being liked was slowly killing you and being misunderstood was finally letting you breathe. For a long time, approval was the currency you lived on. You learned early that keeping the peace meant shrinking, that being accepted meant saying yes when your body screamed no, that love, respect, belonging, all of it came with conditions. Perform well, don't disrupt, don't disappoint, don't make it uncomfortable, and you paid that price over and over again with your energy, your time, your health, your identity. Until one day, something inside you broke, not down, but open. That was the day you stopped asking, will they approve? And started asking, will I survive this if I keep going? And once that question entered the room, there was no going back. Chosen ones, approval is addictive because it feels safe, it feels like protection, it feels like belonging. But here's the truth most people never face. Approval is often just a reward for self-abandonment. People applauded you when you were useful, quiet, accommodating, endlessly understanding. They clapped for the version of you that never asked for too much, never needed too much, never took up too much space. And the moment you stopped performing that role, the applause died instantly. That's when the pressure showed up. The looks, the silence, the subtle guilt, the sudden shift in tone. You felt it. You didn't imagine it. The moment you chose yourself, they acted like you committed a crime, because in their world, your survival disrupted their comfort. You might have asked yourself, why does choosing myself feel like I did something wrong? Because you were trained to equate obedience with goodness. You might have wondered, why do I feel lighter and heavier at the same time? Because freedom always comes with grief for the version of you that stayed too long. Here's a metaphor they won't like. Imagine you've been holding a door shut for years, so chaos on the other side doesn't spill out. Everyone walks by, relieved the door is closed, never asking how tired your arms are. The day you finally let go, the door swings open. And instead of asking why the chaos was there in the first place, they blame you for stepping aside. Chosen ones, that's exactly what happened. You didn't create the mess. You just stopped holding it together with your own body. The most powerful part, you didn't apologize. Not because you were cruel, not because you lacked empathy, but because you finally understood this truth. Apologizing for survival teaches people they're entitled to your destruction. And you were done negotiating your right to exist. This is where the title comes alive. You weren't trying to save anyone. You weren't trying to prove a point. You weren't trying to teach lessons. You were trying to stay alive, mentally, emotionally, physically. And in choosing survival, something unexpected happened. Everything that depended on your silence, your sacrifice, your approval-seeking behavior started to unravel. They lost their scapegoat. They lost their stabilizer. They lost the person who made their dysfunction manageable, and they felt it immediately. Chosen ones, this is why they keep bringing it up, why they replay the moment you said no, why they talk about how you changed, because that was the day they lost control. That was the day you stopped negotiating your worth. That was the day you chose alignment over acceptance. And yes, it cost you approval, but look at what you gained. Clarity, energy, self-respect, peace that doesn't require permission. Approval keeps you small because it's fragile. Survival makes you solid because it's real. Approval demands constant performance. Survival demands honesty. Approval asks you to bend. Survival asks you to stand. Here's the part you need to hear clearly. Chosen ones. The people who truly respected you didn't leave when you chose yourself. Only the ones who benefited from your self-erasure did. And that's not loss, that's filtration. You didn't become selfish, you became self-aware. You didn't become cold, you became selective. You didn't stop caring, you stopped bleeding. The day you chose survival over approval, you didn't just save yourself. You saved the future version of you from a lifetime of resentment. You saved your nervous system from permanent exhaustion. You saved relationships you haven't even met yet, ones that won't require you to disappear to be loved. And most importantly, you saved everything that would have collapsed anyway if you stayed. So stand firm in that choice, chosen ones. Let them misunderstand, let them talk, let them judge. Approval was never the goal, survival was. And the moment you chose it without apology, you didn't just walk away from the fire, you shut off the fuel. Number 8. Why saying nothing hurt them more than any explanation ever could. Silence was the move that broke their grip. You didn't confuse them by leaving, you destroyed them by no longer explaining why. My dear chosen ones, this is where it really hit them. Not when you argued, not when you tried to make them understand, not even when you walked away. It was when you stopped talking altogether, when you chose silence, not as avoidance, but as a decision. That's when the real damage happened, because explanations keep people comfortable. Silence forces them to sit with themselves. You see, for a long time, your words were their safety net. Every explanation you gave softened their guilt. Every justification you offered helped them rewrite the story in their favor. Every time you over-explained, you gave them something to argue with, twist, minimize, or dismiss. Your voice kept the illusion alive that this was a misunderstanding instead of a pattern. And then one day, chosen ones, you said nothing. That's when they lost control. You might have wondered, why does my silence bother them more than my honesty ever did? Because silence ends negotiation. Silence means you're no longer asking to be understood. Silence means you've already made peace with not being validated by people who benefited from misunderstanding you. Here's the part they'll never admit. As long as you were explaining yourself, they still had power. Power to interrupt, power to deny, power to tell you that you were overreacting, too sensitive, imagining things. But silence took all of that away. You didn't give them a script. You didn't give them an angle. You didn't give them a role. They were used to you filling in the gaps. You were the translator of their behavior, the one who made excuses for them, the one who said they didn't mean it like that, even when it hurt. Your silence forced the truth to stand on its own, and it was uglier than they expected. Think about this metaphor, chosen ones. Imagine someone who's been controlling a conversation by constantly interrupting. Then suddenly, the other person stops responding. No argument, no defense, just stillness. That silence becomes deafening. It leaves the interrupter alone with their own words echoing back at them. That's what you did. They kept waiting, waiting for the message, waiting for the explanation, waiting for you to come back and smooth things over like you always did. They were convinced you'd eventually crack because you always had before. Silence was unfamiliar territory. And unfamiliar territory is terrifying to people who rely on predictability to stay in control. You may have felt guilty at first, that urge to explain, to clarify, to make sure you weren't misunderstood. That urge didn't come from kindness, it came from conditioning. You were trained to believe that being silent was cruel, that not explaining was wrong. But here's the truth. You don't owe clarity to people who used your explanations against you. Chosen ones, your silence wasn't passive, it was decisive. It said, "I see the pattern now, and I'm done participating." And that statement, unspoken, landed harder than any speech you could have given. Notice how they reacted. They didn't ask what they did wrong. They accused you of changing. They didn't reflect. They projected. They didn't seek understanding. They demanded access. That tells you everything. People who want resolution ask questions. People who want control demand answers. Your silence exposed that difference. You might ask, why do they keep talking about me now that I've stopped talking to them? Because silence creates a vacuum, and they're desperate to fill it. Without your voice to manage the narrative, they have to invent one. And the version they invent always paints you as cold, selfish, or distant. Not because it's true, but because it helps them avoid accountability. Here's what really hurt them. Your silence meant you no longer needed them to validate your experience. It meant you trusted yourself more than their opinion. And nothing threatens insecure systems more than someone who no longer seeks approval. Chosen ones, silence is powerful because it shifts the weight. The burden of explanation moves off your shoulders and lands exactly where it belongs. On them, on their behavior, on their choices, on the consequences they were protected from as long as you kept talking. And let's be honest, when you were explaining, they weren't listening. They were waiting for their turn to respond. Silence took away their turn. This is why saying nothing hurt more than any explanation ever could, because explanations invite debate. Silence ends it. Explanations ask for understanding. Silence declares understanding has already been reached. You didn't go quiet to punish anyone. You went quiet to protect yourself, and that choice saved more than your energy. It saved your clarity, your peace, and your future. It stopped the cycle. It broke the loop. It ended the pattern. Chosen ones, silence isn't empty. Silence is full of answers. And the people who were hurt by it weren't hurt because they cared. They were hurt because they lost access. Remember this as we move forward. You weren't trying to make a statement. You were trying to breathe. And in choosing silence, you didn't just walk away from the noise. You stepped into a power they can't argue with. Number 9. The aftershock. How your exit quietly gave others permission to leave too. When you left, the ground didn't just shake, it sent a signal. Your exit didn't inspire people, it proved something they were afraid to test. My dear chosen ones, this is the part almost nobody sees, but everyone feels. The aftershock. Not the loud moment when you left, not the drama they tried to attach to your name, but the quiet ripple that spread when people realized something undeniable. You walked away and you survived. You didn't collapse. You didn't disappear. You didn't crawl back. And that single fact did more damage to the old order than any argument ever could. You weren't trying to give permission. You weren't trying to lead a movement. You weren't trying to show anyone how brave you were. You were just trying to breathe. And yet, the moment you chose yourself, something shifted in the background. People who had been watching silently felt it. People who never spoke up, never commented, never defended you, they noticed. Because your exit answered a question they'd been too scared to ask out loud. Is it actually possible to leave and still be okay? That's why this hit so deep. Most people don't stay because they want to. They stay because they think they have to. They stay because fear wears the costume of responsibility. They stay because guilt pretends to be loyalty. They stay because they've been told that choosing themselves will cost them everything. And then they watched you do exactly that. Choose yourself, and the world didn't end. Chosen ones, you became living evidence, not a motivational quote, not a speech, not a lesson, evidence. You proved that the cage was never locked. People just stopped trying the door. Here's the part that makes the enemy uncomfortable. Your strength didn't come from shouting your truth. It came from quietly refusing to keep bleeding. You didn't explain yourself into exhaustion. You didn't seek approval. You didn't wait for permission. You stepped out of the pattern, and the pattern lost its power. Think about what that does to someone who's been shrinking for years. Someone who's been told to endure, tolerate, forgive endlessly, and stay quiet. Someone who's been carrying the same weight you carried. When they see you leave and still stand tall, it cracks their denial. They start asking dangerous questions. Why am I still here? What am I afraid of? If they could do it, what's stopping me? You might never hear their names. You might never get a thank you. But somewhere, someone packed a bag because you did. Someone set a boundary because you showed it wouldn't destroy them. Someone finally said no because you said no and didn't apologize for it. Your survival became their rehearsal. This is the hidden cost of being chosen. Your moves echo louder than you realize. Not because you're superior, but because you're willing to face discomfort first. You go where others hesitate. You feel the pain early. You exit before the collapse instead of waiting for permission to drown. And when you do, it creates a blueprint, whether you intended it or not. You might wonder, why does it feel like people are watching me even though they say they don't care? Because exits like yours don't go unnoticed. They threaten the stories people tell themselves to stay stuck. If they admit your freedom is real, they have to admit their own imprisonment is a choice. And that realization is terrifying. So instead, some will minimize you, some will mock, some will rewrite history, but others, the quiet ones, will study you. They'll replay your decisions, they'll measure your calm, they'll notice how you didn't lose yourself after leaving. And slowly, something inside them will start to shift. Chosen ones, this is why your exit mattered more than your presence ever did. When you stayed, you were useful. When you left, you were undeniable. Your absence forced truth into the room. It showed who was dependent, who was avoidant, and who never learned how to stand without leaning on you. And here's the part that completes the title you're living right now. You weren't trying to save anyone. You weren't setting out to change lives. You were trying not to lose your own. But by choosing yourself, by refusing to keep sacrificing quietly, you saved something bigger than a single situation. You saved futures. You saved timelines. You saved people from believing they had no way out. That's the aftershock. Not applause, not recognition, impact. So if it feels lonely at times, remember this. Pioneers always walk ahead of the crowd. The path feels empty at first because you're the one carving it. Others follow later, quietly when they're ready. And they follow because you proved something crucial. Freedom is survivable. Stand firm, chosen ones. Your exit didn't just change your life. It changed what people believe is possible. And that kind of impact can't be taken back. As we close this chapter, take a breath and let it land. What you've heard isn't theory, it's lived truth. You didn't force change, you became it by choosing yourself. And that choice matters. If this message resonated, support the work by liking this video and subscribing to the channel so we can keep delivering content that challenges, empowers, and energizes. Drop 77 in the comments if you know this moment reflects your own journey. Share this with someone who needs permission to step back and stand tall. Stay with us. This isn't the end. It's momentum.